Kumlan and a block Gemara. We are up to Daf Kuf Daled Amud Aleph, the Mishnah. So, Cholza Balayla. If you gave her chalitza at night, b'diavad chalitza sekshera. Not the chatchila, b'diavad the chalitza is kosher at night. I will soon discuss why, because l'chayda a din Torah should not be held at night. How do we treat a chalitza? But Abelazar says even b'diavad it is possible. Another din, bismoil. We're up to, we just started the Mishnah. Okay, so if you did at night, it's kosher or not. Then the middle of the Mishnah, bismoil. If you did it on the left foot, chalitza psula, it is possible. But Abelazar says it is kosher. Okay, says the Gemara. Let's talk about the night first. But let us say, let us say that this is the machlekes. This is the machlekes. The Marsava, one of them holds makshinan. We compare, we equate ribim l'negoyim. In the pasuk it says that kol riv, the whole nega, and so on and so forth. You bring before you judges. So riv is commercial law, and nega is saras. So we say, just like negoyim can only be seen by day, because it says by the koyin ubeyoyim heirois has to be on by day. So also too, all commercial matters is by day. What does chalitza have to do with commercial matters? Because the outcome of chalitza is she gets her ksuva from her first husband. So therefore, it also touches commercial matters. Even though yesterday we called it Isur, but it also touches on commercial. So therefore, just like commercial laws by day, so too here by day as well. So therefore, one of them holds you compare it to commercial law, and therefore what? And what do we know by commercial law? That you must start by day, but you can finish by night. And one of them says you don't compare. Right now, we don't know the difference between starting a commercial law or any commercial law. We just know whether you compare it or not. So one holds you do compare the two, and therefore you cannot do it by night. Another holds you don't compare it, therefore you can also do chalitza at night. Says the Gemara, no, loy. Everyone holds you don't compare the two. Because because then if you are makish, then I feel Gemara didn't allow namilay. And even then, you're not allowed to if you compare to by nega, only by day can the kohen see. It doesn't matter the beginning of the tzaras, the middle tzaras, the end tzaras can only see by day. So, and yet here we're going to make a distinction between the beginning of a commercial law and any commercial law. And here the argument is as follows. We know when it comes to commercial law that you begin by day, and once you started by day, you can finish it. Gemar din can be at night. Judgment can be done at night. So Mar Sava, how do we treat chalitza? One of them holds the chalitzas kitchilas din damya. One of them holds like you're just starting the case. The outcomes will be so and so. But what you're doing the chalitza is not the outcomes. The outcomes is the gemar din. So this is the beginning of then you cannot do it by day. That's what Rabbi says. You're not allowed to even do it by the evet. The other one says no. The chalitza is all you have to do. The rest happens automatically. So therefore, this is like the gemar din, the sentence, and that you can do at night as well. Rabbi. It's just very interesting. The Taisus over here, on this Gemara here, about 4 lines into white lines. Taisus, brings a Rishalmi that learns a little bit differently. And what's interesting is the end of that Taisus Mar Sava, the very end. He says the last 6 words. He says you should know. He quotes Rishalmi and he says really the Rishalmi should be the other way around, exactly the opposite of what it's written. And he concludes V'harba dvarim yesh b'Rishalmi shetzorich lahavcham. There are many things written in Rishalmi that actually it's written upside down. It's written totally the wrong way and should be changed around. Interesting comment to make about the Yerushalmi. It's saying that many parts of the Yerushalmi are written incorrectly. Maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't paskin like Yerushalmi, because we don't know really what it should be saying. Anyway, interesting cases. So the Gemara continues. Rabba bar Chia Ketusa. Rabba, the son of Chia, or others say Rabba, the son of Chia, Avad Uvda, he once did the following. He was a dayan, so he once gave chalitza to a woman, and this is what he did. He did 3 things that all of them seem to be only b'di'evid, and he did them. First of all, he did b'muk. He did over there that made out of felt, which was not made out of leather. He remembers it's only one opinion that says you don't need leather. Other opinions, the majority actually was you do need leather, because we learned from tachash that it has to be like an animal. The next one is ubi yechidi. He did it on his own, even though there's an opinion saying do it on his own, but our Mishnah says the chatchila should be 3 judges. He didn't follow the Mishnah. And Ubalayla, he did it at night, which we just learned. It's only the evidence, right? Omar Shmuel was incensed. He says, "Kamar Rav Guvre the Ovid Kichidov." Wow, what arrogance this person has that he thinks that he can follow the lone opinions and not what do you call follow the opinions of majority. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. My kasha, what bothered Shmuel? If what bothered Shmuel was muk. Stama Tanya, we learned before in the Brisa as well. We learned Brisa, an anonymous Brisa, there's no author Brisa, that says that you can use a stump on a leg and you can use a muk. And you can use also that which you use, to hold your feet when you drag your feet on the ground. So it says clearly the Brisa anonymous as well. Sounds like also a big body of law, paskin of authority. You could use a muk. Lila, if it bothers him, Lila. Stamatanina, we learned as well, and our Mishnah says that it's kosher. Ella Yechidi kasher. What bothered really was Yechidi, that he did it on his own. Hechi Abba Yechidi. How in the world can he have paskin on his own? Yechidog, that's mamish, a lone opinion. What do you mean it's a lone opinion? Because at least at night in our Mishnah, the majority hold that if you did it at night, it's all right. But to paskin on your own, there's only one opinion that says you can pass on. Now we learned the Cholz. We'll soon see in the next mission. Cholz b'shnayim. We had two judges, three judges. One of the judges turned out to be disqualified because he was a relative. He was a relative to one of the other judges, or relative to the person, the Yavam or the Yevama. Apostle, for whatever reason, was disqualified. Chalitzosep. So the chalitz is possible because we need more. We need two judges, at least three. But they say it's kosher. There was a story. Somebody was in prison, a brother-in-law and a sister-in-law. They're both in prison. There were no judges, no nothing around, and they did it between themselves. Kiva came along and said, he said that even that is kosher. And Rabbi Yechid came along and said, halacha is not like that pair that says you need two people. So therefore, Rabbi Kiva seems to be the only one that holds that even one person is good enough. How can Rava by Rabbi Chia follow a lone opinion of Rabbi Kiva when you have everyone against him? Says the Gemara, the boys ain't. Sorry, the boys aim. So I can tell you. So maybe that's what bothered Shmuel. What bothered Shmuel was, how is it that you paskin at night when that's only a lone opinion? That's what bothered him. Or what bothered him is, in fact, all of these three dinim is really a lone opinion. The time we look at the Brisa, I need each of them. I want sort of Elisha, I do all these three. In other words, there's only one person who says you can do all three, Muk, Yechidi, and Laila, and that's Rabbi Shmuel and Elisha. And Shmuel was saying, how can you follow one opinion of Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha? Taisa already wants to know, how is it possible for Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yasi to have seen, he said, I saw Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, we say in Yom Kippur, is one of those 10 people who were killed, Asara Harugim Malchus, those 10 martyrs, and he was killed before even Rabbi Akiva was killed. And on the other hand, it says regarding Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yasi, his father was great Rabbi Yasi, and he himself used to study with Rebbe. Rebbe was only born when Rabbi Akiva passed away. So if Rebbe's born Rabbi Akiva passed away, and if Rabbi Elisha was a student by Rebbe, obviously he was much younger. So how in the world could he have seen Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, who died before Rabbi Akiva was killed? Well, before Rebbe was even born. So Trace's answers that age has nothing to do with it. In fact, the Gemara says if Rabbi Yasi himself would have been alive, he would have been a student by Rebbe. Which means Rebbe was so great that even people way his senior would study by him. So it's quite possible Shmuel Rabbi Yasi studied by Rebbe, even though he's much older than Rebbe. Or says Taisus, easy way out, there were two Rabbi Shmuel ben Elishas. Okay, the Gemara says further, the smile chalitzos and the left foot is no good. My time with the Rabbanon, why do the Rabbanon say that that it's no good? And when it comes to smile, Rabbanon the ones are machmer, left foot is no good, and Rabbanon says it's all right. So my time with the Rabbanon, what's the story? The Rabbanon Ula says it says a regel. When it comes to Yavam, it says you have to put it me'al ragloi, and when it comes to mitzayda, it says over there that the kohen places the oil on his thumb and by his ear, and it says here al boyin ragla hayamanis, on the thumb of the right toe. It says clearly to right by the word regel. So just like over there it says regel is right, So here also regel is right. From Mitzayda. Malahal dimin. Okay, it has to be the right foot. So to over here has to be the right foot. But doesn't learn after regel from Mitzayda and have the Gzer Shav, and therefore he holds you could use, but you ever use the left foot, it's all right. Says he learned Gzer Shav. He learned from that very pasuk another Gzer Shav, because that pasuk spells out not only the right foot, the right toe, it also talks about the right thumb. And he says the time and the right ear. Abelazar says, I know an Ebed who says after 6 years or half this I want to stay with here. I want to stay on as an Ebed, so we have to pierce his right ear. And which ear do we pierce? The right ear. How do we know it's the right ear? How do we know it's the right ear? Then Makan here it says the word oizen. It says over here that you have to take him, this slave, to the door, and you pierce his ear. It doesn't say which ear. The Nemalahal noise, it says by Mitzayda, the ear. And Malahal, you mean by the Mitzayda, clearly it's what? It's the right ear. Afkan, you mean the right ear. So he does use Gzer Shav from that very pasuk for another matter. So why doesn't he use regel as well, like a Chadim? Oh, no, easy way out. The other way around. Rabbi Lazar is the one who says that it's possible because he uses Gzer Shav, and the Chachamim don't believe Gzer Shav, therefore it's kosher. Rabbi says, no, don't swap things around. You don't swap things around unless you have no choice. Here we have a choice. In order to have a Gzer Shav, a little bit before, there's 3 kinds. Either where both words are extra, on both sides, or at least one side is mufta, or neither is mufta. If neither is mufta, you can ask a question and undermine the entire Gzer Shav. If one of them is extra, one of them is not, there's a machlekes if you can ask a question. If both of them are extra, then everyone agrees you can't ask any questions. The Torah deliberately put those extra words in to teach you the Gzer Shav. Even in logic, it doesn't make sense. It's irrelevant. Now, we're going to see there's a machlekes if one of them is extra, if you can ask questions or not. And goes as follows. When it comes to the ears, they're both extra, and therefore we learn Gzer Shav. So by Mitzayda, the word Oizen is extra, and by Nirtz it's extra, because there's a whole passage of Mitzayda is talking about a person who cannot afford it, and he brings up a poorer carbon. And you don't have to repeat all the dinim again. So everything in that passage is extra, and so on and so forth. And by Ritzia, it says twice the word ear in the pasuk, so one of them is extra again. So therefore, we have extra on both sides. Everyone agrees it's about Gzer Shav. Because it says in one pasuk, if it's oznoi, you should pierce his ear. Another pasuk says, "V'nasata ba'oznoi ubedalos." You should pierce it, through his ear and by the door. But when it comes to regel, one of them is not extra. One of them is extra. One is not extra. The one by mitzvah is extra because the entire pasuk is extra. It's talking about a poor person. We already know all the dinim before. You delineated them all. You're just repeating if you can't afford it. But by chalitza, it's not extra. There's only one, and this is the machlekes. Rabbi Lazar holds that if it's extra on one side, not the other, we can undermine it. Chacham holds, as long as one of them is extra, it's for Gzer Shav. Therefore, they learn that the left foot is possible, but Rabbi Lazar holds we don't learn Gzer Shav now, because we can ask a good question. What question can you ask? You know why Mitzayda was so pedantic and was so particular about which foot and all that? You can't tell, and he requires so many other things. He needs 8 eddas, cedar wood. He needs Azav, Hyssop, Shnishalas, and the red string. So because it needs all these extra dinim, so maybe you also need a right foot. But by Yevamos, you don't have any other dinim other than this. Then who said we're so particular which foot it is? I told you yesterday, there are 4 opinions. If somebody's actually a lefty, what happens then? One opinion says his left foot is his right foot, that's no problem. Others say, no, you still have to use the right foot that everybody uses. Others say, we don't know, so you do both. And others say he can never give chalitza because he has no foot. Mishnah. What happens? There are 3 parts to chalitza. You have to do chalitza, remove the shoe. You have to, she has to spit. And then both of them have to say certain psukim. So we want to know how vital they all 3 parts, how critical it is to the procedure. If you missed out any of these 3, there's still a valid chalitza or not. So Mishnah. Cholzo, you did the chalitza, you did the spitting, but avalei kari, you didn't read the psukim. Chalitza, everyone holds it's kosher, because the reading of psukim is not in any way preventing you the chalitza from happening. Because it says the pasuk kocha yasa. This is how you should do. So the maisa is important. The dibur is not that important. Okay. What about cholzo? You did chalitza, v'kari, you read the psukim, avalei raka, you didn't do the spitting. It's possible because that's kocha is what you have to do. Any activity has to be done. If you don't, it's not yetzer. Give us a chalitza shir. Give us kosher. What's the svarah of the key? That's what Gemara explains. Rabbi says kocha. It says a pasuk. Kocha. This is what should be done to a person. and it says kochios lish. That doesn't want to build a legacy of his brother. So it says kochios. This is what you have to do. You can't deviate at all. Called over shemaisa mak. Anything which is a maisa involves a maisa is ma'akif, which is you have to do the chalitza, you have to do the spinning. Dibur is not a maisa, even though we learn more makas and in other places that there's opinion that says that dibur is a maisa. That dibur is a maisa. So Taisa says there's different degrees of dibur, where you shout or you just talk. Different degrees of dibur. So, and over here, the dibur is basically a very small mice, a minor mice. It's not even considered a mice. So what's Rabbi Kiva's for then? How come he holds that it's critical? That it's not critical at all. And dibur is a mice. Says he. Amalei Rabbi Akiva. Akiva says, "Misham Ra'yev." There's a proof. It says the pasuk Kocha Yasal Ish. When do we say Kocha Yasal that this has to be done and can't deviate? Only if it involves the person. Kol davar shu ma'aseh b'ish, anything which involves the person, which is the chalitz itself. But the spinning is only her; it's all her, not him. And because the spinning is all her, it's not ma'akiv if he didn't do it. Says the Gemara right. Says the Mishnah further. Somebody that received the chalitza, the hacharesh shecholza, or this charesh is this woman that is. What do you go? Deaf and dumb, and she did the chalitza, or chalitza lekotten, or let's say she did chalitza to a youngster, chalitza. So all of these cases, the chalitza is possible. Why is the chalitza possible? Seeing the Gemara, is it because they lack understanding of what it is? Especially we learned before that you need kavana. Remember we said before everything has to have kavana. Is that what it is by chalitza, or is there another issue here? Is it part of mitzvahs or whatever? We'll see. What about a Tana Shecholza? What about a young girl that gave chalitza? By the way, Rashi says that a cheresh who gave chalitza, the chalitza is puzzle. If the guy is a cheresh, puzzle. What it means puzzle? Doesn't say it's not a chalitza. It's puzzle. Puzzle means that there are other brothers. What do you call it? They can no longer marry her, because the cheresh gave a chalitza, cannot free her, but on the other hand, they can no longer marry her, and therefore he has to get chalitza from somebody else in order to go free. What about in the other case, if a chereshes who received she was a chereshes who received chalitza, the chalitza itself is puzzle, and the only way is either if she has a co-wife, she receives the chalitza yibum and then she goes free, or if there's nobody else, then she has to marry one of the brothers and get divorced straight away. What about a tana shecholza? What about a young girl who gave chalitza? Tachlitz mishetagdul, when she gets older, she has to give chalitza again. The imle cholza, and she did not give chalitza again. Chalitza psula. You not give chalitza again. The chalitza is puzzle, which means you cannot marry any of them. She has to get a chalitza from somebody else. Cholza b'shnayim by b'shleisha. What happened? This is what we were just looking at before. If you gave a chalitza by one or two or three people, these are not going to be possible. Then turn out to be a disqualified judge. Chalitza, so the chalitza is puzzle. No, either she used the two cases there. Either you had two judges, or you had three, and one of them were disqualified. But basically, it brings it back down to two. Is Abshimon is a puzzle because you need three. Abshimon, they hold that two is good enough. It seems that one is not good enough, but two is good enough. You will learn more than Sanhedrin above. What Shmuel said about Bez and Chatzif. You still need two. And then we have one Tana that's Rabbi Akiva. They gave each other chalitza in jail. Rabbi Akiva said it's all right. I mean, Rabbi Akiva's the lone opinion that says that one is good enough. Says the Rabbi says, now that you tell me Kriya Rabbi Akiva says, and now that we learned that Kriya, everyone agrees is not critical. If you don't read the psukim, it's not the end of the world. Somebody's mute and she's mute. They gave each other chalitza. If she gave chalitza is kosher, because reading out the psukim is not vital. If they can't speak, it's all right. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah as a question. We learned in our Mishnah for someone deaf and dumb that received chalitza or chareshes, or she was deaf and dumb. Shecholza or chalitza mean hakotner of a child is the one who gave chalitza. No, she gave chalitza to a minor the Yom was a child, is psula, chalitza, all of them are possible. Now, my timer, l'chayda, what's the problem? What's the problem with the chedesh? Isn't it the same thing? Because he cannot read. So what are you telling me? That if somebody cannot read, somebody's mute, it can still give chalitza. It says here clearly that a chedesh can't, and l'chayda, the reason is because they can't speak. So we see that speaking, even though that you will soon see more of the difference if you're able to speak, if you can't. Since you cannot speak, it's not a valid chalitza. So no, that's not the problem with Chedesh. They're the problem is they're not intelligent. They cannot have kavanah. So the Gemara right now thought Elim Belem is Nami. So Elim Belem is also, do we question their intelligence? Amarava, Elim Belem is Bnei Deini. They're the intelligent people. Actually, we had in the beginning Chagiga. Not sure what it was. We had in the beginning Chagiga that only a Chedesh deaf and dumb is someone that's not Bnei Deya. But someone who's only deaf or somebody who's only dumb is definitely intelligent. They have a side issue for a reason they cannot speak. Says the Gemara, but Rav Yana, didn't Rav Yana say that the problem with Chedesh Chadeshes is he cannot say the psukim that he needs to say, and she cannot say the psukim that she needs to say. It's clearly the problem is their lack of ability to speak. Now, why don't we say the problem is because of the lack of intelligence? Because Taisus already brings down here, interesting, that if somebody's standing on top of them and monitoring them and telling them what to do, B'shas Maisa, they will listen, they'll do what you have to do. So therefore, as far as intelligence is concerned, they can do what they have to do. So the problem here is, because they cannot speak. They're unable to speak. So if it says unable to speak, so how can Rabbi say that a mute person can give chalitza? Says the Gemara, in fact, what Rabbi said was regarding the end. It says in the end, so it says in all these cases that it's possible. Rabba says Rabba. So what are they saying over here? The beginning of the Mishnah said that Kriya doesn't matter. You forgot the psukim doesn't matter. So Rabba wanted to learn from there that a mute person is all right. Now we're saying no, we can't read, it's important. So we were saying at the end of the Mishnah where it said that a chedesh is not all right. Why? Because they cannot speak. So therefore he says, Hashad Amr Kriya Ma'akva, Kriya is so important, a chedesh cannot do chalitza. The mute person cannot give chalitza because they cannot speak. Says the Gemara, no. So how do you explain the first part of the Mishnah? If the way we're explaining now that reading the psukim is so critical and somebody who's deaf and dumb, somebody's mute, cannot give chalitza, so how come the beginning of the Mishnah said that if you gave chalitza and you spat, but you didn't say the psukim, it's all right? If l'chayda is so critical, the psukim, why should it be all right? So the Gemara, the famous Rab Zera. What's the famous Rab Zera? The story is as follows. Somebody donated 61 Yisraelim. He said, I'm going to give a measure, 61 measurements. I'm going to donate to Beis Hamikdash for a carbon flour offering. And now the trader ideally would like you to mix and stir it. And we say that the maximum you can stir is 60 Yisraelim. 61 cannot be stirred. So therefore you do 60 in one pot and one in another pot. So the question is, but the halach is if you didn't stir, it doesn't matter. So who cares? Why can't you put all 61 in one keli and just stir it? And you don't stir. So Red comes along and says, "Kol harol if it's able to be stirred, then ein bil makazba. It doesn't matter if you stir or not. Or the kol she'ein rol bila, but if it's not capable of being stirred, then bila makazba. Then if you cannot, then it's important. In other words, if you're able to speak but you forgot to speak, okay, you can do chalitza. But if you're unable to speak because you're mute, then the chalitza is not good. Tracy wants to know that. Taisa explains here, interesting, that why is the Gemara's question in the first place that you have, if Bila doesn't matter, what's the Gemara question? The Gemara says, why can't you put all 61 in one pot since Bila doesn't matter? Taisa says, what do you mean it doesn't matter? But the fact that the Torah said, it says, how many times Minchas Blula B'Shemen? It says so many times the word Blula. And Taisa already count how many times it is, many times. So then Blula, so therefore the you should do it. So what's the Gemara's question? Why can't you put 61 in one pot? So what if it doesn't get mixed? But l'chatchila, you have to mix it. So he says here, the Gemara's question is as follows. Since you said I am donating to one mincha 61 Esrainim, it should really be in one pot. It should really be in one pot. This is an exception because you don't want two pots means like two kabbanas. Because you said you didn't say I'm just donating 61 Esrainim to the Beis Hamikdash, then of course use two pots. And there's no question. Better to we want you to be able to mix it. But because you said that all 61 should be directed for one carbon, for all one carbon, it should be all in one pot. And even though you have to mix it, but in this case, your neder overrides the lechatchila because by the evidence, all right, if you don't mix it, and you want them all in one pot. And that's the Gemara's question. And the Gemara says, nevertheless, it has to be able to be stirred. And since 61 cannot be stirred, you don't put it there at all. Talking about it further, they sent a letter to the Shmuel's father, known as Avud Shmuel. A long time ago, I told you why they always referred to him. His real name is Abba. Why they always referred to him as the father of Shmuel. So everyone should be aware that he is Shmuel's father, and not the way they allege that Shmuel was a mamzer. So they sent to the father Shmuel, Yevamos Sherakukam. They sent him a letter as follows: if a Yevam spat before a bezin, then tachlitz. Then she must do chalitza. In other words, the law, the way in the Torah, first you do chalitza and then you do spitting. But if she went in front of a bezin, and they're going to do a chalitza procedure, and process, and then she went ahead and she spat before the chalitza, too late. She can no longer do yibum. She has to go ahead with the chalitza process. Why? From him that's it. She no longer can marry the brothers, even though she reversed the order of the Torah. She did the spitting before. Man, he said, who says that if you spat before the chalitza, it's strong enough that it passes you from marrying any of the brothers? If it's Rabbi Akiva, so let me ask you a question. When it comes to a mitzvah, Rabbi Akiva said on top of the page that if she didn't spit, it doesn't matter. Rabbi Loza says, yes, spitting is vital. So Madach, you did it correctly. You're standing in the bezin, you did chalitza, and now you're supposed to spit. And yet, Rabbi Akiva says, I don't care if you didn't spit, it's all right. You can argue just about carbon. By a carbon, when you shech a carbon, you must take the fats and put it on the mizbeach. And if you didn't put the fats on the mizbeach, you cannot eat from the meat of the carbon. But what happens if the fats disappeared or the fats became tummy? Then the din is you can go ahead and eat as if it's not there. So no, if it's not there, it doesn't matter. But if it's there, it matters. So we can say, same with spit. You can argue, okay, if you didn't spit at all, okay. But if you spat, if you're there in a bezin and you did chalitza, now you're ready to spit. If you don't spit, it is possible. Madav me have more like fats by carbon. If they're not there at all, it's not makva at all. And yet the is the makva if it's there, if it's available. It is makva. So Rabbi Akiva should have ruled, hey, if you're there in front of a bezin and you could spit. Then it's like the fats of a carbon. If it's there and you don't put it on his beich, it's ma'akiv the whole carbon. Same thing over here. Since you're there in bezin, you did the chalitza, you're ready, and you could spit and you don't spit, it should be ma'akiv the whole chalitza. And yet Rabbi Akiva says, loy ma'akiv, it's not ma'akiv at all. So over here she spat. She spat. What do you call it? Before even the bezin started, which is nothing at all. Is ma'akiv ma'akiv? Usually you want to say that you puzzle from brothers. It doesn't matter at all. Rabbi Akiva holds that even when you should spit, and if you didn't, it doesn't matter. So spitting is not a big thing. It's not a big deal. So why, according to Rabbi Akiva, why should we puzzle? If we puzzle from the brothers. So how can Rabbi Akiva say that if you spat before, in other words, which doesn't count because you didn't spit when you're supposed to, it should hold the brothers back from marrying? It can't be at all because it doesn't matter. Because Rabbi Akiva holds if you didn't spit, it doesn't in any way passel the whole chalitza. Even though the Yevamos is standing here, the Yavam is standing here, they're all here, and you can spit again. He says doesn't matter. So if you spat without chalitza, you can tell me that something is so powerful that it asks it from our brothers. Why? So it must be according to Rabbi Loza. Rabbi Loza who says that spitting is very important. Says the Gemara, but even according to Rabbi Loza. Even Rabbi Loza, spitting is very, very important. And if you did the chalitza without the spitting, nothing happened. But still, you need two parts, the spitting and chalitza. So if you need two parts, you only did one, then it's not like you did half. It's like you did nothing. So why should the spit before the chalitza ask her disqualify from marrying the brothers? That's the question. These are two things together. They permit her to marry other people. Two things. If you have two things, you need both of them. If you do one without the other, it's zero. That's the half. Unless you follow Rebbe. Rebbe holds that if you need two parts to the equation and you only have one, you did half. So therefore, because spitting is part of the equation, you need spitting and chalitza. You did one, the spitting, you achieve something. You're not mutter to the rest of the world, but you're usher on your brothers. What's the story of Rebbe? Every time we learned. Keep Seyat said is come Shavuos. You have to bring 2 lambs of Shavuos, and you also bring the shtei lechem up, the two loaves of bread that you bake. Now the 2 loaves don't become kaddish, don't become sanctified until you shecht those 2 lambs. And when you shecht it, it becomes kedushas haguf. It becomes, in essence, it becomes holy. That means now that if you take it outside the base of Mikdash, it becomes possible because you took something holy outside. If you leave it overnight, it becomes possible because of lina. You left it overnight. But when does it become kedushas haguf? Only when you go ahead and shecht the animal. And when can you go ahead and eat the loaves of bread? When you do the next step, which is sprinkling the blood. So there are 2 parts to be able to eat the bread: the shechting and the sprinkling the blood. So the question is as follows: Keeps that said as ein mekatchem alechem. They don't make the shtei lechem holy. Ela b'shchita you shecht it. Kate said how shachton l'shmon you shecht it for the right reasons. V'zorek dam l'shmon you sprinkle the blood for the right reasons. What happens if kiddush is kiddush alechem? That's when the bread becomes holy and you can eat it. What happens? Shachad, you shechted it, shaloi lishman. You had the wrong thing in mind by the shechita, the first process, the zarek lishman. Then everyone says, since the first step was wrong, then it doesn't matter what you did afterwards. Like kiddush alech, the bread does not become holy, and therefore, if you take it outside the base media, nothing happened, and so on and so forth. What about shacht and lishman? You did the first step correctly. You shechted correctly, but the zarek lishman, but you sprinkle the blood lishman. Then kadosh the einu kadosh. You did half a job. So what do you did half a job? On the one hand, it became Kedushas Haguf. You cannot take it out of the base of Mikdash overnight. It becomes possible. On the other hand, you cannot eat it yet. So you did half a job. So according to Rebbe, when there are 2 parts, you did one, you did half a job. Spitting and chalitza is 2 parts. You spat, you did something. What do? You cannot marry your brothers anymore. What you didn't do is permit you to live with the outside world. Rabbi Lazar Shimon says, if you have to do 2 things, you did one, stop saying you did half, you did nothing. Says the Gemara, let me ask you a question. Me, Rabbi Kiva, you tell me Rabbi Kiva says. Now we're asking what we originally said. Rabbi Kiva, if you don't spit, no problem. Or if you spit before the chalitza, nothing happened. She's still permitted to her brother. Says the Gemara, me, Rabbi Kiva, the Kiva apostle. You want to tell me? Rabbi Kiva, hold that spitting. There's a apostle, but Tanya, we learned the Braisa. Cholza, we learned the Braisa follows. He did chalitza, but he didn't spit. He did chalitza, he didn't spit. So all you did was the chalitza. You didn't spit. You didn't say the psukim. Chalitza, the chalitza is kosher. So the only thing you did was chalitza. It's all right, even though you didn't spit, you didn't say the psukim. Rokaka, you spat, but you didn't do the chalitza part, the removal of the shoe. You did the psukim. Then chalitza psula, it's possible. What do you mean possible? You still achieved something. Chalitza psula is not the same thing as saying nothing happened. Something did happen. What happened? It passes you from being able to marry any of the brothers, even though it's ineffective as far as releasing you, but it's effective as far as forbidding you to marry any of the brothers, because you started the process of saying, I don't want to build a legacy of the deceased. What about, okay, so in case number 1, you did only chalitza, good. You did only the spinning, you did something, you ruined it. What about kora? All you did was you read the psukim. V'loy raka, you didn't spit. V'loy cholch, you didn't chalitza. Nothing happened. So these are the 3 steps. Nothing happened. Something happened, but enough to cause you problems, or it was a complete release. Now, Mani, who's the author of this brisa? Who's the author of this brisa? And what we see in this brisa is that spinning matters. That spinning asks her on her brothers, even though you didn't do chalitza. Now let's see who the author of the brisa is, because we're trying to say maybe it's Rabbi Kiva, and therefore it contradicts what we said a minute ago. Rabbi Kiva, spinning is nothing. If you say Rabbi, how could it be? It says here, you're going to tell me that what? That if you did chalitza without spitting, it's kosher. What did Rabbi say in our Mishnah? Rabbi in our Mishnah clearly said that if you did chalitza without spitting, nothing happened, because it says the pasuk kocha ya'asa. You have to follow exactly what it says. Anything to do with ma'isa, the chalitza and the spitting has to be done by the Torah says. Well, Rabbi said that kocha ya'asa. It said that kochi also cold dovashu ma'aser ma'akiv. Anything to do with ma'aser, like spitting as well, is ma'akiv. So how can the Braisa say in the beginning, if you did only chalitza, it's kosher? Obviously, pshit Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva is the one who says if you did only only chalitza without spitting, it's kosher. Not Rabbi Lezer. And yet the second case is the Tony Rock if you only spat. V'loy cholza, v'loy kara, chalitza psula. The chalitza is possible. Now, what do you mean psula? Lama ilaim la'almot. She cannot marry anybody else. Shita. Of course. We know that. You didn't do the proper chalitza, you didn't remove the shoe. Why would you think you're permitted to marry strangers? Where was the chalitza here to permit it to the rest of the world? So when we say she's puzzled, what are we trying to say? She's puzzled to her brothers. So it's clear Rabbi Kiva also agrees if you only spat, even though it doesn't release you, it still forbids you to marry the brothers. Isn't that clear? Isn't that clear? So Gemara answers. Gemara says, right. So that means the Gemara changes his mind. Even according to Rabbi Akiva, if she only spat, it's sufficient that she asks her any of the brothers-in-law to marry her. Says the Gemara. So why is it? So case number 2 is spitting, and you tell me, even though spitting, in the Mishnah said, it's not that important. But if you did chalitza without spitting, it doesn't matter. So spitting is not that important. And yet, if you did spitting on its own, you tell me, it passes on the brothers. So ma'ishno kriya, and kriya, if you did on its own, does nothing. You, Rabbi Akiva, say that spitting is not that important because if you did chalitza, the removal of the shoe without spitting, it's a good chalitza. In other words, spitting is not important. But yet, if you only did the spitting, it ruins her. She can no longer marry the brothers-in-law. So how come if you only did the psukim, she could marry the brothers-in-law? You say, ain't kan beis mechus. What's the difference between spitting or speaking? Says Gemara, kriya, when it comes to reading, the isa bein b'tchila bein b'sayif, when it comes to reading, you read before chalitza as well. The first thing, the way the process works is the first thing she gets up, before it does anything, it says, me'ein yevami, my brother-in-law refuses to marry. And then after she removes the shoe, she says, kacha ya'asa. So the psukim that I said before, the psukim that I said afterwards. So therefore, even let's say, if we allow her, kriya, the isa bein b'tchila b'sayif, lei michlevei, if we see, let's say, if we just say she only said the pasuk before, and that's it. If she goes ahead and gets married, nobody's going to say, that chalutza is allowed to go ahead and get married. Nobody's going to say, next time if someone received the chalitza, we saw say psukim. So next time, and they think it's part of the chalitza, that if she goes ahead and she gets chalitza, she's allowed to marry a brother-in-law. Nobody will say that. Why? Because people will say maybe she only said the psukim that was before the chalitza. So therefore, if they see she says only one pasuk, and then we allow her to marry, nobody will say, we allowed her to marry, say after pasuk, that means no matter what part of chalitza she did, she can go marry a brother-in-law. No, because they'll say no shoe was removed. This pasuk we know. So some psukim said before even you start the chalitza, it's like a preamble. She's setting the tone. So therefore, maybe all she said was the pasuk before. She did no chalitza. That's why she's allowed to marry a brother-in-law. So that's what we allow. If she only said a pasuk, no problem. Go marry your brother-in-law. But kika, when it comes to spitting, the bechil lesel, b'sayvi says spitting is only done after the shoe is removed. So if they see her spit, they'll assume that a chalitza was done, and then they see her marry a brother-in-law. What are they going to say? Even if there's a full chalitza, because they don't even know, that you're allowed to marry a brother-in-law. Mistakes can arise. They come along and they're going to say you're allowed to marry a chalitza to a brother, and that is a problem. Just quickly, others say. So did we just talking about what they were sent to Avu de Shmuel? Others say, this is what they said to him. Yevama, just few more lines. Yevama sherakaka, Yevama. This is the letter they sent to Avu de Shmuel. Not about that if she spat, she no longer marry her brother-in-law. But she must go ahead with the chalitza. But something else. They said to Yevama sherakaka, a Yevama that's pat, tachlitz, she has to chalitza. But the chiddush was we don't get her to spit a second time, even though the Torah clearly says remove the shoe and spit. Since she spat beforehand in front of a bezin, that's good enough. And the story is kahi, like it once happened. The Yevama asked the kamer Abami. And Abba Bamam was sitting there before him as well. She spat before she began the chalitza. Abami said, let's go through the chalitza, and then we'll send her away. That's it. All she has to do now is the chalitza. Made it. Over that spitting, she spat before, but shouldn't she spit again afterwards? So Abami said, she already spat. So he asked him back. Rabba said, why don't we do the right thing? Okay, she spat before. What's wrong? She did now the chalitza. She'll do the chalitza. Let's get her to spit the second time correctly, the way the Torah says it. And marash, is that the right way to do it? So he said, no, nothing. A problem will arise from this. You know why? The problem is as follows. If you're going to mandate that she has to do a second spitting, so what happens when people are going to observe what happens? What are they going to say? The first spitting doesn't matter. How many people will say the kika kamaisa lesba mashasha? Her first spitting didn't count, and therefore she had to do it again. So what's going to happen in the future? In the future, she just spat in front of the bezin, and then she decided to walk out. She decided to change her mind. She wants to marry a brother-in-law. They're going to let her because they're going to think, why not? Spitting before the chalitza doesn't matter. But we saw with our own eyes that she spat before, and they made her spit again afterwards. So therefore, it doesn't. It's not a good idea. Let people realize that the spitting before does matter. So the more ask the question, why taka? Why taka do we accept the spitting before? But being a Kesidim, doesn't the Torah put an order in place? First you do the removal of the shoe and then the spitting? Says Gemara, Kesidim. The fact that it has to be in a certain order is not really that vital. Who saw us? He thought, Abba thought, he's just stalling, pushing away. Nothing went out. Doki searched, but Ashken found the Tanya. It says, "Bein shehegdim chalitza l'rekia." Says a clear lebraisa. It doesn't matter the order. Whether he did the chalitza first and then the spitting. Bein shehegdim l'kika chalitza. He did the spitting first and then the chalitza. Masha asa asa. Whatever you did is valid. He did, and that's it. And it's kosher. Okay, we'll stop here. And